In February of 2026, America's oldest motorcycle company changed hands for the third time. And if you know anything about Indian motorcycles history, that sentence alone should make your stomach drop. Because Indian has died before. Twice. The first time in 1953, after half a century of building some of the fastest, most beautiful machines on two wheels. The second time in 2003, when an entire factory full of workers showed up on a Friday morning and found out they didn't have jobs anymore. No warning, no severance, just locked doors and silence. Now, a private equity firm from Los Angeles, a company that previously owned bagel shops and hot sauce brands, has taken control of a 125-year-old motorcycle icon. And the riding community is asking one very loud question: is this how Indian dies again? But the answer might not be what you think, because the details of this deal, the people involved, and one very specific hire tell a more complicated story than the headlines suggest. Let's start at the very beginning. The year is 1901. George Hendy, a former national cycling champion who had won over 300 bicycle races, teamed up with Oscar Hedstrom, a Swedish-born engineer who built motorized pacing bikes for velodrome races. Together, in a small workshop in Springfield, Massachusetts, they built their first prototype motorcycle. It had 1.75 horsepower, a single-cylinder engine, an all-chain drive system, and it looked basically like a bicycle with ambitions. They called it the Indian. Within 2 years, they were selling over 100 machines annually. By 1907, Indian became the first American manufacturer to put a V-twin engine into production. By 1913, the Springfield factory known as the Wigwam was pushing out 32,000 motorcycles a year, making Indian the largest motorcycle manufacturer on the planet. And the racing. Oh man, the racing. Indian dominated board track racing, which was basically NASCAR on wooden oval tracks, with no brakes, no helmets, and speeds over 100 miles per hour. Their star rider, Jake DeRosier, won nearly 900 races before dying at 33 from crash injuries. These guys were absolute maniacs in the best possible way, but the moment that put Indian on the global map happened in 1911 at the Isle of Man TT. This was the first year the race used the full 37-mile mountain course, and Indian showed up with 2 speed gearboxes and chain drive, while most British bikes were still running single speed belt drives. Oliver Godfrey won the senior class. Charles Franklin and Arthur Morehouse finished second and third, a clean 1-2-3 sweep. The first non-British manufacturer to ever win the TT. It shook European motorcycle racing to its core. Indian built legends, the Scout in 1920, the Chief in 1922, the iconic skirted fenders in 1940, Ed Kretz winning the very first Daytona 200 in 1937 on a Sport Scout. And then there was Burt Munro, the New Zealander who bought a 600 cubic centimeter Indian Scout in 1920 and spent decades hand modifying it in his shed, eventually setting a land speed record of 184 miles per hour at the Bonneville Salt Flats in 1967 at age 68. That record still stands today, and the category has been retired. It will never be broken. However, 2 world wars slowly bled Indian dry. During World War I, the company sold roughly 50,000 motorcycles to the military, which sounds patriotic until you realize it completely starved their dealer network. Dealers switched to Harley-Davidson. Indian never recovered that ground. In World War II, the same thing happened again. Indian dedicated virtually all production to military contracts, while Harley-Davidson built 88,000 military bikes and kept making civilian models too. After the war, new ownership made a catastrophic bet. They scrapped the proven Scout and Chief platforms to build lightweight bikes aimed at competing with cheap British imports. The new models were rushed, unreliable, and customers hated them. Production limped along until 1953, when the last Chiefs were assembled from leftover parts. America's first motorcycle company was gone. For the next 45 years, the Indian trademark bounced between owners like a used bar napkin, a British conglomerate, a motorcycle magazine publisher who died of a heart attack before finishing his prototype, a moped manufacturer who bought the name out of bankruptcy for $10,000 and slapped it on Taiwanese scooters, a guy who ended up convicted of securities fraud. It was a mess. Then in 1998, a group of investors won the trademark in federal bankruptcy court and set up a brand new factory in Gilroy, California. They raised about $30 million, hired workers, and started building Indian Chiefs with off-the-shelf S and S engines, basically Harley-Davidson Evolution clones, at premium prices. The Gilroy bikes had promise, but quality control was a disaster. When they switched to their own proprietary engine, head gasket failures and transmission problems became chronic. Still, 2003 was actually tracking to be a record sales year when a critical multi-million-dollar investment deal collapsed at the last minute. On September 19, 2003, the entire workforce was laid off without warning. No severance. The second death was sudden, ugly, and it traumatized the Indian community. Now here's where the story gets interesting. On April 19, 2011, Polaris Industries, the company that makes RZRs and snowmobiles, announced they had acquired Indian Motorcycle. And unlike every previous owner, Polaris made a decision that changed everything. They decided to build Indian from scratch, not rebadged Victory motorcycles with Indian logos, not recycled engines from other brands, from scratch. The engineering team studied the 1948 Indian Chief, designed an entirely new engine that honored the original's visual DNA, and moved production to Spirit Lake, Iowa, where roughly 550 workers would build every Indian going forward. They logged over 1 million test miles before anyone outside the company saw the new engine. The Thunderstroke 111 debuted at Sturgis in August 2013. It used a 111 cubic inch air-cooled V-twin that made 119 pound-feet of torque. Alongside it came the all-new Indian Chief Classic, priced at $18,999, Chief Vintage at $20,999, and Chieftain at $22,999. That pricing was $7,000 less than the previous Kings Mountain models. People lost their minds. The 2015 Indian Scout followed, with a liquid-cooled V-twin displacing 1,133 cubic centimeters, making 100 horsepower, and priced at $10,999. It won Motorcycle of the Year. Then, in 2017, Polaris made a brutal but brilliant move. They ended Victory motorcycles entirely to put everything behind Indian. Victory owners felt abandoned. Remember that feeling, because it becomes relevant later. The real flex came in 2019 with the Power Plus engine. It was a clean sheet design, a 108 cubic inch, liquid-cooled V-twin with overhead cams and 4 valves per cylinder, making 122 horsepower. That engine went into the Indian Challenger, which Cycle World named Motorcycle of the Year. By 2025, the upgraded Power Plus 112 was pushing 126 horsepower and 133 pound-feet of torque, with a 6-axis IMU and radar-based collision warnings. And on the racetrack, Indian was dominating. The purpose-built FTR 750 flat tracker won 8 consecutive American Flat Track Championships from 2017 to 2024, capturing 104 out of 138 races. Jared Meese set the all-time championship record with his 10th title in 2024 before retiring. In King of the Baggers, the series where full-dress touring bikes go road racing, Indian captured 3 of 6 championships. Under Polaris, Indian grew from about 4,100 global registrations in 2012 to nearly 34,500 in 2021. That's an 8-fold increase. They hit #1 market share in US mid-size cruisers. It felt like Indian had finally, permanently come back to life. But there was a problem nobody was talking about publicly. Indian did not turn its first profit until 2023, 12 years after Polaris bought it. The brand generated about $478 million in annual revenue, which sounds impressive until you realize that was only 7% of Polaris's total business. When the overall motorcycle market started shrinking in 2024 and 2025, Polaris Chief Executive Officer Mike Speetzen basically concluded the capital tied up in Indian could earn more in the off-road vehicle segment. So on October 13, 2025, Polaris announced it was selling a majority stake to Carolwood LP. And this is where the community went from nervous to genuinely scared. Carolwood LP was founded in 2014 by Andrew Schanfeld and Adam Rubin in downtown Los Angeles. They described themselves as a real estate and private equity firm targeting assets with significant repositioning potential. Their portfolio before Indian included Pop's Bagels, Cha Cha Matcha Coffee, Zab's Hot Sauce, Jomboy Media, a gaming venture, and some commercial real estate including a downtown Los Angeles office tower, they bought for $148 million, about 16 employees total. So yeah, the company that now controls America's oldest motorcycle manufacturer previously ran bagel shops and a sports media startup. Their biggest previous acquisition was a building. Indian Motorcycle, with 900 employees, global manufacturing operations, a dealer network of 600 locations, and an engineering team in Switzerland, is by far the most complex thing Carolwood has ever attempted to manage. However, and this is a big however, two details cut against the panic narrative. First, Carolwood has reportedly never sold a brand or asset they have acquired. If that is true, it breaks the classic private equity pattern of buy, strip, flip in 5 years. Schanfeld called Indian an iconic brand built on American heritage, craftsmanship, and most importantly, a community of riders. Rubin said their role is to ensure that legacy thrives for the next 100 years. Second, and this matters way more than any press release, look at who they hired. Mike Kennedy is the new Chief Executive Officer of Indian Motorcycle. He is not a financial engineer. He is a motorcycle industry veteran with over 30 years of experience, most of it spent at the one company Indian needs to beat. Kennedy spent roughly 15 years at Harley-Davidson across 2 stints. He ran marketing for parts, accessories, and CVO, which is the division that prints money for Harley through accessory sales. He rose to Vice President and Managing Director of the Americas, where he oversaw a $3.5 billion business, 800 dealers, and 300 employees. After that, he ran Vance & Hines, the legendary exhaust and racing company, and then served as Chief Executive Officer of Rumble On Ride Now, the largest powersports dealership group in America. He knows every Harley-Davidson dealer in North America by name. He knows exactly where the weaknesses are, and now he is running the competition. That is not how you hire if you plan to strip a brand for parts. Kennedy has been refreshingly direct about his plans. He told media outlets that Indian will focus exclusively on cruisers, baggers, and touring motorcycles. No electric bikes, no entry-level models, no FTR revival, no adventure bikes. The cheapest Indian will remain the Scout 60 Bobber at $9,999. When asked about the private equity stigma, Kennedy said if Carolwood wanted to split this company up, they would not have hired Mike Kennedy because he does not know how to do that. And the 2026 lineup backs up the talk. The new Sport Scout RT at $16,999 brings the Scout platform into light touring territory with factory-fitted locking saddlebags, a quarter fairing, and a 4-inch Ride Command touchscreen. The Chief Vintage returns after a 4-year absence at $19,999, deliberately echoing 1940s Indian styling with valenced fenders, wire-spoke wheels, and the illuminated Indian headdress ornament. It is gorgeous. For the 125th anniversary, Indian released 4 limited edition hand-painted models. Scout Bobber, 125th anniversary, $17,499, limited to 450 units. Chief Vintage, 125th, $24,999, limited to 250 units. Challenger, 125th, $41,999, limited to 250 units. Roadmaster 125th Anniversary Edition, limited to just 100 units worldwide, $43,999. Hand-painted Anniversary Red with metallic microflakes, pinstriping, and a unique serial number stamped on the tank console. If you are wondering whether those Roadmasters are still available, no, they are not available. Now let's talk about the engineering rivalry that actually matters in this whole story. Indian's Power Plus 112 versus Harley-Davidson's Milwaukee 8 117. This comparison tells you everything about where these two companies are headed. The Power Plus is a fully liquid-cooled 60-degree V-twin with overhead cams and 4 valves per cylinder. It makes 126 horsepower and 133 pound-feet of torque. The Milwaukee 8 117 is a 45-degree V-twin that is only liquid-cooled in the cylinder heads with a pushrod valvetrain, making 105 horsepower and 130 pound-feet of torque. Indian holds a 21 horsepower advantage at basically the same torque, with less displacement. Full liquid cooling matters more than most people realize. It lets the Power Plus maintain consistent operating temperatures, which enables higher compression ratios and tighter tolerances. If you've ever sat in traffic on a Harley in August and felt the engine heat radiating into your legs, you understand why this is not just a spec sheet number. Harley fights back with the aftermarket. You can push a Milwaukee 8 to 145 plus horsepower with off-the-shelf kits. Their resale values are stronger, their dealer network is bigger, and their rider community includes over 1,400 hog chapters. But the engineering gap is real, and it is getting harder for Harley to ignore without abandoning air cooling entirely, which would alienate a huge chunk of their traditional buyer base. And here is the uncomfortable market context for all of this. The American motorcycle industry is shrinking. New sales dropped 7.6% in 2025. The first half of the year was the weakest performance in a decade. Touring declined 13%. Cruisers fell 6%. The median motorcycle owner in America is roughly 50 years old. Fewer than 40% of American teenagers even have a driver's license. Harley-Davidson is in outright crisis, with shipments down 53% in the fourth quarter 2024, stock dropping 31%, and activist investors trying to oust the CEO. Indian actually bucked the trend. Registrations grew 4.9% in 2025, while almost everyone else declined. But the lane Indian operates in, American cruisers and touring bikes, is structurally narrowing. That is the paradox. Indian is doing better within a market that is getting smaller. So should you be worried? Honestly, it depends on what framework you are using. The community on forums like indianmotorcycles.net is roughly split three ways. About 30% are deeply concerned and drawing direct parallels to Victory's demise. They remember what happened when Polaris got bored with a motorcycle brand. About 50% are in wait and see mode. They want to believe, but they have been burned before. And about 20% are genuinely optimistic, mostly because of Kennedy's appointment. The fears are specific and practical. What happens to Ride Command, which was a Polaris product? Will Spirit Lake stay open? What about dealer support? What about the warranty on my 2024 Chieftain? And then there is a deeper existential worry one forum member summed up perfectly. People getting afraid Indian is going under, and then that fear actually drives it under. A self-fulfilling prophecy where market anxiety kills sales, which then justifies the anxiety. Private equity has earned its bad reputation, honestly. Companies acquired through leveraged buyouts are 10 times more likely to go bankrupt. Toys R Us got saddled with over $5 billion in debt. The owners extracted $470 million in fees while the company rotted, and it liquidated in 2018 with 33,000 people losing their jobs. Schwinn went from an American icon to a Walmart label. Those stories are real. But so is the Ducati story. Ducati spent 16 years under two different private equity firms, and both of them invested in product quality and MotoGP racing instead of stripping assets. Revenue quadrupled. The brand eventually sold to Audi for 860 million euros. Fender guitars recovered under private equity ownership. Dunkin' Donuts expanded massively. The pattern that predicts success is clear. Private equity works when owners hire industry operators, invest in the brand, and resist the urge to load crippling debt. It fails when financial engineers replace people who actually understand the product. And there is one more detail worth noting. When Indian officially moved to its new standalone headquarters in Golden Valley, Minnesota, they signed a 7-year lease on a 37,000 square foot facility. That is not something you do if the exit plan is 3 years out. Kennedy also signed a multi-year deal with Vance and Hines Motorsports for King of the Baggers Racing in 2026, bringing on Troy Herfoss, Hayden Gillum, who defected from Harley's racing camp, and rising star Rocco Landers. He told reporters flat out that the first place they plan to prove it is on the racetrack. So here's where we are. Indian Motorcycle, America's first motorcycle company, is celebrating its 125th anniversary under its fourth ownership structure. The brand has produced some of the most beautiful, powerful, and historically significant motorcycles ever built. It has swept the Isle of Man TT, set unbreakable land speed records at Bonneville, dominated flat track racing for nearly a decade, and engineered a liquid-cooled V-twin that embarrasses its biggest rival on paper. It has also died, twice, and both times the pattern was the same. Visionary founders build something extraordinary, subsequent owners make fatal strategic errors, and the community watches helplessly as the machines they love stop being made. The question everyone is asking, whether this is the third death, assumes that pattern cannot be broken. Maybe it cannot. Carolwood has zero motorcycle industry experience. The private equity model has a documented history of destroying exactly this kind of brand. The market is shrinking. The challenges are enormous. But they did not hire a financial engineer. They hired Mike Kennedy, a guy who ran Harley's Americas division, who knows every dealership, every competitive weakness, every opportunity. A guy who looked at this brand and said, yes, I will bet my career on it. That is either the most encouraging sign in Indian's 125-year history, or it is the kind of optimism that makes the eventual disappointment sting even more. If you ride an Indian, keep riding it. If you are thinking about buying one, the bikes are as good as they have ever been. And if you want to follow how this story unfolds, because there is absolutely more coming, hit subscribe. We will be covering every move Carolwood and Kennedy make with this brand. 125 years, 3 lives. And the question that has kept Indian riders up at night since October 2025 still does not have an answer. But the next 12 months are going to tell us everything.